Eason here, back again after 2 weeks of self-reflection and introspection, which didn't really go anywhere. So I'm back again with another episode of Metal Monday, where I talk about albums that I recommend you listen to so you can start your week off right. Well, this week I'll be covering a new album by a band that has gone on a far more extensive hiatus under far more tragic circumstances. It is the much anticipated return of the master purveyors of evil disco. The album that I'm talking about, of course, is Project Regeneration by the one, the only Static X. Static X actually broke up after the 2009 album Cult of Static, while the other members just went on to their different projects. For instance, Koichi Fukuda went with Belucira, Tony Campos joined Fear Factory for a while, etc. Wayne Static only managed to release one solo album after that, and in 2014, unfortunately, passed away. But with the 20th anniversary of their monumental breakout debut album, Wisconsin Death Trip, approaching, the band decided to get together. And when I say the band, I mean the lineup that was in the original album, which has Koichi Fukuda in guitars, Tony Campos on bass, and Ken J on drums. Project Regeneration actually became a thing after the band decided to release some of the leftover recordings from the Start a War album, as well as some unfinished vocal demos left behind by Wayne when he died, material that would have been part of his second solo album. Well, the initial idea was to use a couple of guest vocalists, among which were counted Al Jurgensen of Ministry and Burton C. Bell of Fear Factory, to make up for the parts that Wayne is unable to sing. Tony Campos then stumbled upon a whole slew of other recordings, which included full, complete songs with the vocals done on separate tracks. So the band decided to dispense with the idea of making heavy use of guest vocalists and went to make a new record. This is perfectly exemplified in the first thing that you hear when you start listening to this album, which is, and I quote, "The thing that tragedy brings is the opportunity to rebuild." And rebuild Static X has. And boy, did they build a monster. One thing becomes abundantly clear once the first actual track, Hollow, gets rolling, is that this is a bona fide Static X album. This is the new album by the band. This isn't a cash-in attempt mandated by the label, an attempt to capitalize on the 20th anniversary of their first record. This is a labor of love and is done out of love and respect for the work not only that the band has done, but that Wayne Static has done as well. Static X's unique take on a mixture of nu metal, alternative rock, industrial metal, electronic music, and techno seems to have survived the death of its progenitor. This is 100% evil disco. Raw, unfiltered, pure, undiluted, straight from the original source. You have your pounding staccato power chord riffs courtesy of Mr. Koichi Fukuda. You have the grumbling bass and throaty screams and growls of Mr. Tony Campos. You have the pounding drums of Ken J that sometimes shift fully into industrial mode. And as an added bonus, you have Wayne Static's distinctive vocals. Now, speaking of which, the prevailing question, at least for me at the time of this release, was how it was going to play out in terms of the vocals, because yes, it has been told that there are a lot of isolated vocal recordings that were added into the production of this, but there was bound to be a little bit of slack where Wayne could not generate new vocals, and I was curious as to how the band would handle this, and to my surprise, they handle it exceptionally well. In that regard, I think Project Regeneration actually presents a rare opportunity for the band to move forward, mainly because the new addition to the band's lineup for the tour, Zero, rumored to be Edsel Dope from the band Dope, does a wonderful job of not only just imitating Wayne Static's vocal style, but actually making the vocals his own where he has to do the heavy lifting. In point of fact, 3 tracks on this album, which are Accelerate, My Destruction, and the wonderful Otsego Placebo, features only Zero's vocals, and they couldn't feel more in place. They couldn't feel more like they belong. Also helping him on his quest and picking up some of the vocal staff is Mr. Tony Campos, who seems to have taken a much more active role where the vocals are concerned. Combined with the recordings left over by Mr. Static, these three managed to come together and create an organic sound that dispels any doubts in your head that you are actually listening to the new Static X record. With all of that said, and with every element that seems to be geared towards a nice album being in place, how does the record actually fare? Project Regeneration, to me, is the step up from Cannibal that I was expecting when the Cult of Static came out and decided to mellow things down a little. This album is easily the best work of the band in years and stands as one of their best records. In a sense, Static X not only has rebuilt themselves, but they have rebuilt themselves bigger, better, faster, stronger, and far more savage than they were before. If the track Hollow sets the stage for the great time you're about to have on your next evil disco trip, the track following, Worth Dying For, reminds you that there are still dark corners to be explored here. Worth Dying For plays out like Static X's take on a more or less standard industrial rock track, in that it also features a very infectious, very nice, and very dark hook with a heavy and prominent synth backing. The song not only carries some of the more restrained aggression that the band has been known for, but it also dives into a far deeper emotional pool than Static X ever has before. The more emotional, the darker side of the band doesn't just have a home in only Worth Dying For, though. Another song that is easily its kin would be the second single to be released from Project Regeneration Volume 1 all these years. This song, utilizing an almost Fear Factory reminiscent skittering riff, manages to hit a very tangible sense of darkness both through Wayne's lyrics and the way that the song is structured and the electronic elements are utilized. Of course, we didn't really come into this particular disco to weep now, did we? We also came for the balls-to-the-wall, jumpy, industrial-tinted, danceable metal anthems that Static X was known for. And believe me when I say that Project Regeneration Volume 1 has no shortage of tracks like that. Given that Project Regeneration Volume 1 was also set to feature some recordings that were left over from the Start a War recording sessions, it is par for the course that some of the songs sound more like they have been ripped straight out of the Shadow Zone Start a War era. These tracks include the more industrially savvy mid-tempo rager that is Accelerate, Bring You Down, which starts out with some Roland 808 drum samples, and My Destruction, which basically starts off as an acid techno track complete with 909 kicks. This is one of the reasons why Project Regeneration Volume 1 manages to succeed as the band's next joint, because as tracks like Accelerate or Something of My Own or My Destruction tread familiar ground and give you the feeling of being in familiar territory, songs like Terminator Oscillator or Otsego Placebo take it to the next level. In fact, some of the more aggressive side of the band that was brought forward on Cannibal rears its ugly, despicable, lovely head on tracks like Terminator Oscillator, Accelerate, or My Destruction, but the point where the band seems to lose all inhibitions on their own savagery, and the part where Static X manages to come up with easily the hardest, most aggressive song of their career, would be on Otsego Placebo. Hand to whatever deity that you worship, Otsego Placebo is easily the hardest track that Static X has ever recorded, and it also represents the peak point of Project Regeneration Volume 1, in that it takes every single element that you have heard thus far on this record and turns it up to 11. Between the groovier verses and no holds barred speed-free chorus, Tony Campos's throaty vocals, and Zero screaming his head off, Otsego Placebo is easily the most destructive song that you're gonna hear, and is also the best. Which somewhat creates a little ripple in the track list of this album, because the track that comes after Otsego Placebo, Follow, isn't exactly a bad track per se, but it has the difficult job of following up what is the peak point of the album. And as a result of that, sort of becomes a little lackluster. This goes doubly so because Follow is followed by the closing track, Dead Souls, which is a showstopper of a closer. Dead Souls features backing vocals by none other than Mr. Al Jurgensen himself, but it unexpectedly is a very understated, very melancholic, very emotional track that, interestingly enough, features acoustic guitars. The song is built on the question, would you die for me? And by this point in the album, after having listened to everything that they have brought, the answer tends to be yes. The production on Project Regeneration Volume 1 is superb and extremely fitting for the music that is being brought forward. That should put to rest any doubts anyone who didn't like the production direction that the band took on Cult of Static to rest. Everything sits where they should, the vocals come through loud and clear, the guitars are glossy but still have that hard edge, the bass is wonderfully present throughout, and overall the package sounds wonderful. At just under 40 minutes with 12 tracks, Project Regeneration Volume 1 is a succinct, tight little package that is bound to blast the rust off your eardrums. I have been a fan of Static X since Shadow Zone, mainly because I discovered the band when Shadow Zone first came out. But they have a special place in my heart, and I was really saddened by the fact that Wayne Static had passed away, because this also meant that there was no chance that Static X would be able to come together and make a new album. But Project Regeneration Volume 1 is perhaps better than the album that I could have hoped for should the band ever unite. It sort of recalls one of the very few good things about the third X-Men movie, which was the quote by Magneto, "It was a shame that Charles Xavier had to die for our dream to live." And in this case, I think it is such a shame that Wayne Static had to die for the dream of Static X to live. I'm not discounting the possibility that the band could have put whatever differences that caused them to break up aside, at least for the 20th anniversary of Wisconsin Death Trip, and an album could have resulted out of this. But the question that I keep coming back to is whether or not that album could have been as good as the one that we have now. And the interesting thing about Project Regeneration Volume 1, and one of the main reasons why I loved it so much, is that it is almost as if nothing that had happened in the past 11 years has actually happened. The album sounds and feels like the band never broke up, that Wayne never died, that this was just a result of the band going on an extended holiday and coming back into the studio as always and just recording their next album. And as the new Static X album, this is just simply the best that we could have hoped for. As a result, do I recommend this? I absolutely do. Because even if this is just supposed to be a tribute to the life and work of Wayne Static, it is the best, most respectful, most lovingly well-crafted and fitting tribute that could have been. I sincerely hope that you give this one a chance, and if you are a Static X fan, I highly doubt that you're going to be disappointed by this. So until next time, hope you have a great week. It's Eason. Peace out.